A 12-year-old boy vanished one quiet Sunday morning, leaving behind nothing but silence and a town gripped by grief. For months, hope withered until his mother found a forgotten wooden toy tucked away on a friend's bookshelf. It was the toy that should have disappeared with him. What she discovered next shattered everything she thought she knew and uncovered a truth more terrifying than loss itself. The town of Hawksville nestled among rolling green hills, where summer always began with the song of the lark and ended with the heady aroma of ripe apples in the wind. It was a place where everyone knew each other's names, where doors didn't need locks, and where people joked that sorrow had no place to live. The Bennett family was just like that, a small, white-painted house at the end of Magnolia Lane, with window boxes overflowing with gently cascading flowers. David Bennett was a quiet man, working as a carpenter in the small-town mill. Margaret, his wife, was an elementary school teacher with a smile that could chase away even the rainiest day. And between them was Charlie, a 12-year-old boy with eyes as clear as morning dew, always shining with a belief in the goodness of things. That morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains as usual. Charlie was squatting in the garden, hands covered in dirt, trying to replant a lavender bush that had been knocked over by the wind. Margaret sat beside him, gently guiding him on how to pack the soil so the roots could breathe. They didn't say much, but the way the two of them worked together in silence was as soothing as a wordless melody. "I think I want to be a gardener when I grow up," Charlie suddenly said, his face smudged but his eyes bright. "Oh, really?" Margaret chuckled, brushing a few sweaty strands of hair from her son's forehead. "Why is that?" "Because I think plants never yell at anyone. They just stand there, quietly, but they're very kind." The answer made Margaret pause. Sometimes she forgot that this child had thoughts that were deeper than most adults imagined. At noon, David came home early. He always tried to spend Sunday lunch with his family. Charlie ran out to show off his latest drawing, a treehouse with a wooden staircase and a red flag. David ruffled his son's hair and invited him to sit on the porch swing, where they began a conversation without a theme, just dreams floating in the sunlight. "Do you want to travel far away when you grow up?" David asked, his eyes thoughtful. Charlie shook his head. "I think I'll just build a small bookstore here, with places for people to sit and read, and a fat cat sleeping on the cash register." They both laughed. That was what David loved about his son, his simplicity and a kind, unclouded view of the world. As evening approached, when the cicadas began to buzz, the old iron gate creaked open. Rose Whitmore walked in, carrying a warm apple pie. She was in her 50s, her hair streaked with silver, her face thin but always wearing a warm smile. "Where's Charlie of mine?" Her voice was as light as the wind. Charlie ran out, exclaiming, "Aunt Rose!" He hugged her tightly, no different than hugging a second grandmother. Margaret came out of the kitchen, her eyes softening when she saw her friend. They embraced, a true hug, full of affection. To Margaret, Rose was not just a childhood friend. She was a part of her memories, a part of her youth, and now her son's dear aunt. The apple pie was cut, its aroma filling the air. Rose told stories about clever squirrels hiding nuts in the attic, about a lost sparrow knocking on her window. Charlie laughed, eagerly asking questions, while Margaret just watched, her gaze full of gratitude. "I think I'm lucky to have you in my son's life," Margaret said softly when Charlie ran to the backyard to play. Rose turned and smiled gently. "Not everyone would let someone else be so close to their child like you do," she whispered. "I'm very grateful to you for that." Margaret nodded. She knew. Rose had once had a son. Once. Until the day the news of his abusive father shook the whole town. The child hadn't survived. Rose had lost almost everything after that tragedy, until Charlie was born. "Charlie reminds me that there are still beautiful things in this world," Rose said quietly. "I can't ask to be his mother, but if on weekends I could take him for walks, bake pies, tell stories, like an aunt, would you mind?" Margaret looked straight into her friend's eyes. A moment of hesitation flickered through. But the memory of Rose hugging Charlie, the times she cried when she saw him smile, made Margaret unable to refuse. "As long as it makes both you and Charlie happy," she replied. The sky began to darken. Rose took out a small gift wrapped in newspaper. Charlie unwrapped it. A small, handcrafted wooden car, simple but meticulous. "I made it," Rose said, ruffling Charlie's hair. "It will protect you on all your journeys." Charlie hugged the car tightly. "Thank you, Aunt." As night fell, when Charlie was sound asleep, Margaret sat alone on the porch. Moonlight shone in her eyes, weary but at peace. She believed in Rose, in the magical relationship between a woman who had lost her son and a kind boy. She didn't see. At the end of the road, Rose stopped, looking back at the house behind her. The wind gently blew across her face. In her eyes, fleetingly, was something empty, distant. Not like someone who had just said goodbye to a happy day, but like someone retreating from the real world to step into another, where everything could start again in their own way. But Margaret didn't see, and Charlie, he only saw a good aunt with delicious apple pie and fairy tales full of magic. The morning began like any other Sunday, with birds chirping outside the window and the fragrant smell of coffee in the kitchen. Margaret sat up, rubbing her eyes, looking to her side. Charlie's bed was empty. At first, she wasn't worried. The boy often woke up early, running to the yard to play with the cat or read a book under the pear tree. But when she went downstairs and didn't see her son, an uneasy feeling crept into her heart like a sudden cold wind. "Charlie?" she called out, her voice still gentle. No answer. She walked around the house, opened the back door, checked the bathroom, the storage room. Every minute that passed, the worry in her was no longer a small spark. It burst into flames. When she entered her son's room again and saw that the wooden car wasn't on the table as it usually was, Margaret gasped. "David!" she screamed, tears involuntarily flowing. David ran from the workshop. Before he could even ask what happened, he saw his wife's pale face. "Charlie isn't home. I've looked everywhere. The whole garden, the bathroom, the attic. He's nowhere." He didn't say anything, just squeezed his wife's hand and quickly called the police. The police arrived quickly. A group began searching the area around the house, and residents who heard the news also flocked to participate. From the small forest behind the house to the riverbank where Charlie used to fish with his father, every tree, every bush was turned upside down. Margaret stood in the middle of the garden, clutching her son's pajamas. Her eyes were vacant, as if her soul had left her body and run all over town looking for Charlie before her. Beside her, David tried to remain calm, but his fingers trembled as he answered the police's questions. When Rose appeared, she almost collapsed on the doorstep, her face pale. "No way, no way," she whispered, her voice trembling. Then, as if caught up in that terror, Rose ran to hug Margaret, sobbing. "Oh God, Charlie. Where could he have gone?" Margaret, in that moment, couldn't distinguish which pain was hers, which pain was Rose's. She let her old friend hug her, crying together. They leaned on each other like two people floundering in a sea of waves, no longer knowing which way to go. The afternoon passed slowly, like a century. The police still hadn't found any trace, no strange footprints, no drag marks, no screams in the night. As if Charlie had vanished into thin air. In the small bedroom, Margaret sat alone, the red sunset casting through the window. She stared at the family photo on the table, a photo of the three of them camping together. Charlie's eyes were always sparkling. Now, that image was like a knife to her heart. She began to question herself. Had I locked the door? Did I hear anything unusual? What did I do wrong? But the more she thought, the less she could find an answer, because in her heart, Charlie was a good child, too good to wander off, too cautious to open the door to strangers. She suddenly remembered the previous evening. Charlie had said he wanted to go to the library tomorrow, asking his mother to take him. The boy was still planning, still dreaming. There was no reason for him to leave. No reason. Margaret buried her face in the pillow, sobbing. She didn't cry out loud, just stifled sounds that were so suppressed that she was almost suffocating. Outside, Rose sat silently under the pear tree in the backyard. Her hands gripped the hem of her dress, her eyes staring blankly towards the forest. People brought her water, offered her something to eat. She shook her head. "I feel like my heart has been taken away too," Rose told a police officer. "I love him as much as my own flesh and blood. I've been there since he took his first steps. He is what's left of me." People nodded, not suspecting anything. Because the way Rose trembled, the way she called Charlie's name as if calling her own son, it was all too real. Night came. Flashlights shone all over town. Loudspeakers continuously read out Charlie's description. Male, 12 years old, light brown hair, wearing a blue shirt, carrying a small wooden car. Margaret hugged Charlie's pajamas and fell asleep on the sofa. David tucked his wife in, then went out to the porch, looking at the moonless night sky. The wind blew strongly. The trees rustled as if whispering something that no one could understand. The next morning, the sun rose slowly. Margaret woke up, her eyes swollen red. The first thing she did was run to the door, hoping for something absurd, that Charlie had returned, sitting in front of the porch with the wooden car in his hand, smiling and saying, "I just went out to play for a bit, don't worry, Mom." But the porch was still empty. She slumped down, holding her head. Then, from afar, Rose appeared again. Her eyes were also red, carrying an old embroidered handkerchief. She knelt down before Margaret, taking her hand. "We'll find him, won't we?" Her voice choked. Margaret looked deep into Rose's eyes, cloudy eyes, but shining with painful compassion. She nodded, as if there was nothing left to cling to but a faint glimmer of hope in those words. But somewhere in her heart, a small part had begun to crack. She didn't know if it was fear or a silent premonition that something had really shattered. Not just a disappearance, but a part of her memory. A part of her trust was fading away in the long days ahead. 3 weeks had passed since Charlie's disappearance. Hawksville, the small town that had once been as peaceful as a midday nap, was now covered in a heavy atmosphere that no one dared to name. People who used to smile at each other every morning now only nodded slightly, their eyes avoiding each other. They had searched all possible places, from the edge of the forest, the lakeside, to the abandoned houses. But Charlie had evaporated from the world. The police officially suspended active investigation. "Not giving up," they told Margaret. "It's just, all the leads have run dry." Margaret sat silently in the living room, her hands clutching the piece of paper recording the decision. Outside it was raining lightly, the patter like a sigh. She couldn't remember the last time she slept through the night. Every short sleep was full of nightmares. Charlie standing by the road, calling her mom in a vague voice, then disappearing into the fog. Rose still came to the house. She brought chicken soup, cookies, embroidered handkerchiefs, always knowing when to hold Margaret's hand, when to be silent. But there was something strange. Something Margaret couldn't name, only felt her heart was no longer as peaceful as before. The first time she noticed, Rose never mentioned finding Charlie. Not a single question. What did the police say? Зрение. Ни слова. Есть ли у нас все еще надежда? Only things like, the boy must be in a more peaceful place than this world. Or, maybe he's in another story where he's loved the right way. Margaret initially had some self-doubt, but then she scolded herself. "You're being paranoid. Rose lost a child. Now it's like she's lost another one. She's in as much pain as I am." One gloomy afternoon, Margaret stopped by Rose's house to return the raincoat Charlie had forgotten during their last camping trip. Rose wasn't home. The door wasn't locked. Margaret hesitated for a moment, then stepped inside, not out of suspicion, but out of familiarity. Everything was still neat. The fireplace still had Rose's son's photo. The boy with bright eyes, curly hair, smiling innocently. The old photo was blurred, the wooden frame scratched at the edge. Margaret took a tissue and wiped the thin layer of dust covering the glass. Then she heard a whisper from the inner room, light, vague. She stepped lightly, opened the door slightly. Rose was sitting there in a rocking chair. In her hand was a small doll with curly hair just like the boy in the photo. She was stroking that woolen hair, her voice trembling. "Good boy, Charlie. Aunt's here now, honey. No one can hurt you anymore." Margaret froze. Not because Rose was hugging a doll. Everyone has their own way of dealing with loss. But because her voice at that moment, not as if she was remembering, but as if she was really living in that moment. A real lullaby. A mother lulling her child to sleep. Someone who believed she had her child by her side. But that's right. A mother who has lost her child whom she loved most twice. There is no pain that can compare with doing that. Margaret stood there watching that moment for another minute, and then she quietly withdrew from the room. That evening, Margaret didn't eat dinner. David brought her a cup of tea, sitting down next to his wife, not asking anything, not forcing her to speak. They sat together in silence. The wind blew gently through the window, bringing with it a cold, damp smell and a bit of the taste of autumn coming. "We'll be okay, won't we?" Margaret asked, her voice hoarse. David turned to her, his eyes affectionate but tired. "I believe that one day we will know what happened." Margaret bowed her head. She wanted to believe her husband, believe in goodness, believe in love. But deep down, another voice was whispering. Late at night, Margaret opened the desk drawer, taking out Charlie's wooden car. The little car, the wheels round and worn. One side still had a stain of blue ink. Charlie used to play writing when he was in first grade. She hugged it tightly to her chest, closing her eyes. Then tears flowed silently. Not the mournful cries of the first days of losing her child, but a deeper, quieter pain. The pain that no longer screamed, but smoldered like a wound in the heart, bleeding a little every day. A few days later, Rose came again. Still the old floral dress, still the gentle voice. "Have you eaten anything?" she asked. Margaret looked at her friend, smiling forcedly. "Are you okay?" Rose asked again. Margaret hesitated. "I don't know. Some days I feel like something is being hidden." Rose was silent for a moment. Her eyes, for a moment, didn't avoid, but looked at Margaret as if seeing through her. Then she smiled, a smile so gentle it was scary. "Not all truths save us, Margaret." Margaret froze. She didn't know how to understand that sentence, but from that moment on, her heart seemed to have cracked a small crack, very small, but enough for water to seep in. And Margaret understood. If she didn't stop, didn't find out what that was, then one day, the storm would come and drown everything. One Saturday morning, Rose called Margaret. "Are you free?" Her voice was still as gentle as usual. "I want to clean up some old bookshelves. My back hasn't been cooperating lately." Margaret was silent for a second before agreeing. She didn't know why she accepted. Maybe out of pity for her old friend. Maybe because of a vague urge that something would happen today. Rose's house was still the same, cozy, neat, full of the breath of old days. The smell of lavender essential oil permeated the air, so gentle that it made people want to be optimistic. Rose led her to the living room, where there was a wooden bookshelf that had faded with time. "I should probably get rid of some books too." Margaret didn't say anything. She took a cloth and started from the bottom shelf. Children's books, peeling covers, old photo albums, an unnamed diary, and then, as her hand swept through the messy pile of books, a small wooden box appeared. It was deep in the corner of the shelf, hidden by two thick novels. Margaret hesitated, but then reached out and pulled it out. The box was smooth, without a lock, light, as if it didn't contain anything heavy. She opened it, not out of curiosity, but as a reflex, and her heart stopped beating. Inside was Charlie's wooden car. The car had a scratch on the front wheel, exactly where the boy had dropped it on the doorstep. A faint blue streak on the body, the trace of a scribbled drawing from when he was in second grade. Unmistakable. Margaret felt as if someone had sucked all the air out of her lungs. Her hands trembled. She wanted to scream, wanted to ask, why? Zrenia, but her throat was stiff. Not a single sound could escape. Charlie had never left that car. Even when he went to bed, he had to put it right under his pillow. After the day he went missing, both she and David searched the whole house. No one found it. The police didn't either. She had believed that it disappeared with her son, as a part of him that had been swept away in mystery. So why? Was it here? In Rose's house? Margaret closed the box, gently as if not wanting to wake it up. She put everything back the way it was, wiped the dust again, not saying anything. She tried to regulate her breathing, even though her hands were cold, and her chest felt as if it was being squeezed from all sides. Rose brought in 2 cups of tea. "I made peppermint, the kind you like best," she smiled. A smile still the same as 10 years ago, when they both took baking classes every Wednesday evening. "Thank you," Margaret replied softly, trying to keep her hand holding the cup from trembling. They sat opposite each other. Rose told about a new book she had read, about a stray cat that came to knock on her window at night. Margaret nodded, occasionally smiling, but her head could no longer hear any of the words clearly. She didn't dare to look into Rose's eyes, not out of fear, but because if she looked, she was afraid she would see something she couldn't turn back from. That afternoon, Margaret returned home, closing the door of the room. She stood in front of the mirror, looking deep into her own eyes. That look was no longer just painful, but a newly ignited spark of terror, hidden under the mask of calm. She took a pen, writing in a small notebook. The wooden car. No way to mistake it. So, who hid it? Why does Rose have it? Is it her? No, I can't think that. But I can't help but think. From that day on, Margaret began to follow. Not like a detective in a movie, but as the instinct of a mother walking along the edge of a cliff, ready to slip for any sign. She quietly sat in the car, parked a few houses away from Rose's house, observing through the mirror. She saw that every weekend, Rose always went somewhere, very early. Not the supermarket, not to visit anyone. She carried a large backpack, discreet, and always carried water, some boxes of dried food, as if preparing for a long journey. At first, Margaret told herself, maybe she's going hiking, maybe she's volunteering somewhere. But what made her unable to continue pretending was the direction, always north, towards the forest, towards where people had searched for Charlie and found nothing. One Sunday morning, Margaret followed from a distance. She drove slowly, a few curves away. Rose walked, her backpack neatly on her back. When she turned onto the dirt road leading into the forest, Margaret stopped, not daring to go further. She just sat in the car, looking at that path, the narrow, gloomy road covered by shadows of trees like a secret. She sat like that for hours, and in her heart, something like a silent collapse began to form. That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. David put his hand on her shoulder. "What's wrong?" She turned to look at him, not lying, but also not telling the truth. She just replied, "I feel like something is wrong, but if I say it, I'm afraid I won't be able to forgive myself, whether it's right or wrong." David hugged his wife. "I'm here. Whatever you think, whatever happens." Margaret rested her head on her husband's shoulder, but her eyes were still wide open, looking into the darkness of the room, where there was no light, no sound, only the fear that was beginning to take shape. In another part of town, when Henry and Lisa Thompson decided to change their weekend picnic plans, they had no idea that the trip would become an indelible mark in their lives, and in the heart of a town that had run out of hope. They were a couple in their 30s, loved nature, often exploring little-known trails. Henry carried an old map from a forestry friend, marking a narrow path leading deep into the north, where the forest was almost forgotten due to the rugged terrain and rumors of wolves. But that day, they followed it, and everything began. Noon. The sky was gloomy, thick clouds as if covering a gloomy screen over the forest. Thick leaves underfoot, occasionally the sound of a lonely bird and the wind whistling softly through the tall trees. Lisa stopped. "Do you see anything?" Henry squinted, looking through the gap between two oak trees. In the heart of the forest, between the vines, fallen leaves, and damp gray, there was something that didn't belong to nature. A rough wooden structure suspended on the trunk of a large tree. A house. On a tree. Maybe some kids built it to play, Henry guessed. But who would build something like that in this deserted forest? Lisa asked back, her eyes worried. They approached. The smell of old wood, the smell of damp dust, and the smell of mold. The air there was thick as if the place had been forgotten by time. A rope ladder was hung. Lisa hesitated, but Henry said, "I'll go up first." He climbed slowly, each step creaking. When he got there, he pulled aside the dirty fabric curtain, and his heart fell to the bottom of the abyss. The room was cramped. The wooden walls were lined with makeshift planks. The floor was covered with old pieces of fabric. A tattered baby blanket, a few children's books, a small cassette player with tangled headphones. And in the corner of the room, a boy curled up, so skinny that you could see his collarbones protruding, his hair long, almost covering his eyes, his skin pale as if he had never seen the sun. The round eyes were wide open, staring straight at Henry as if the man had just stepped out of a dream. "What's your name?" Henry asked, his voice so light it was choked. The boy didn't answer. His lips moved slightly. Then, as if years had accumulated, he burst into tears, the sobs choked, tattered like a heart just torn out of the darkness. Lisa climbed up after, and when she saw the boy, she could only exclaim, "Oh my God!" Charlie Bennett. The name was confirmed when they brought him down to the ground, wrapped him in their coats, and called an ambulance. On the way, Charlie didn't say anything more, just hugged Lisa's coat tightly, shivering in bursts, as if his body didn't believe he was really leaving that place. Henry and Lisa didn't ask too much, not because they weren't curious, but because that boy didn't need any more questions. He needed to return to the light. When the ambulance took Charlie to the town's medical center, the news spread like lightning. Charlie Bennett has been found. People couldn't even believe it when they heard that. Neighbors who had quietly removed the search photos from the utility poles now looked at each other with pale faces. In their hearts, and in Margaret's heart, the hope that had once been thought dead suddenly revived too quickly, too strongly, making their hearts hurt as if they had just been squeezed and released. Margaret was making tea when the phone rang. David answered, and with just a nod, a whisper, "It's Charlie." Zrania, she collapsed on the floor. At the hospital, Margaret entered the room as if stepping into a dream. Charlie lay on the bed, wrapped in a blanket, sleeping soundly after being infused and checked. His face was gaunt, his lips dry and pale, but his eyes, even when closed, still shone with unquenched terror. She didn't dare to touch him right away, just stood there, her hands clutching the chair, silently looking at the son she had thought she had lost forever. David put his hand on his wife's shoulder, his eyes also red. "Miracle?" That was all he could say. In the afternoon, Charlie woke up. His eyes opened without reaction, just looking at the ceiling as if he still didn't understand where he was. Margaret sat down, gently taking her son's hand. He didn't pull away, but he didn't hold back either. Son, Mom is here." Margaret's voice trembled like the wind. Charlie turned his head, his eyes cloudy with fear, empty, then sparkling with tears. Is this real?" he asked softly. His voice hoarse, as if his throat hadn't spoken for a very long time. Margaret nodded. "It's real, son. Mom is here. It's Mom." Charlie looked at her, and in that moment, all the pain, all the doubts, all the broken days burst out. He hugged his mother, weakly but desperately. Margaret squeezed her son in her arms, crying like a child, not holding back anything. Outside the window, it was raining lightly. But the town was no longer gloomy. News about Charlie spread across local websites, television, radio. People flocked to the hospital, not to look, but to believe again. To believe that miracles can still happen in this world. But also on the same day, when the police asked Charlie about what had happened, he only said one sentence. I was taken into the forest. I was held by someone who said she was my mother. A chill ran down the spines of everyone present. When they asked the name of that person, Charlie only whispered, Aunt Rose. The town's medical station stood on a high hill where people usually brought minor illnesses rather than shocking stories. But these days, the second floor of the special psychological treatment area was heavily guarded. Charlie Bennett was there. He was cared for 24/7, no contact with strangers, not asked too many questions. What he needed was time, to breathe, to remember, and to redefine himself. But he didn't sleep. The first night, he just sat with his head against the wall, his eyes wide open, the dim light shining on his face a pale color like wax. The nurse said the boy wouldn't eat, wouldn't drink, unless Margaret was there. But even when his mother came, Charlie kept his distance. He didn't cry, didn't speak. He just looked, a deep gaze as if from a very far-away place, unable to be called back by ordinary words. Margaret sat by the bed for the first 2 days. She didn't ask, didn't touch what he wasn't ready to say. She just put her hand near her son's hand, not touching, just leaving it there, as if to let Charlie know, if he needed it, Mom was right here. Once, she saw him looking up at her hand, slowly, then bowing his head. His eyes were red, but no tears fell, as if he had forgotten how to cry. On the third day, a young officer, named Karen, was assigned to approach Charlie, at the suggestion of a psychologist. Karen wasn't wearing a uniform, just a soothing blue sweater, and her gaze didn't carry any orders. She didn't sit opposite. She sat next to him, far enough away not to threaten, close enough so he didn't feel alone. You don't have to say anything at all. But if one day you want to tell, just tell it your way. The boy didn't react. Karen left a box of crayons, not saying anything more, then left the room. That evening, Charlie drew. Not beautiful, not neat, just scribbles. A treehouse, a woman with an unclear face, an old cassette player, and a child without a mouth. Margaret saw the drawing the next morning. She just put her hand on it, not crying, but her hands trembled. On the fourth afternoon, Charlie actively called Karen. His voice was small, hoarse, like leaking from a door closed for a long time. Do you have paper? Karen nodded. She gave him paper, a pen. Charlie wrote, slowly. I didn't know who I was. Karen looked up. He didn't look at her, still continuing to write. She said I didn't have a mother, that my mother was dead, that she was my mother. She gave me sweets, told stories, sang lullabies. At first I felt strange, but gradually, I believed. Because she cried when I called Mom, and because there was no one else there. Karen put her hand on the table gently. What happened then? Charlie stopped. His eyes filled with tears. She told a story every night, about a baby without a name, living on a tree. And that baby was me. He was silent for a moment, then continued. There's a tape player. Every morning, I was forced to listen to a sentence over and over. You are mine. No one remembers you. I am your only world. I wasn't allowed to ask about the past. If I asked, she got angry. I was given toys, but not allowed to mention Charlie. Every time I accidentally said Charlie, she shouted, That's not your name. That's someone else. He's dead. You are mine. Karen was silent, taking notes carefully, but her eyes were tearful. "And why did you know you didn't belong there?" she asked. Charlie raised his head. His voice broke like an iceberg being cut across. "One night, I dreamed of a woman with peppermint-smelling hair, calling me Charlie. No one had ever called me that there. I woke up, looking around. Didn't see anyone. But after that night, I remembered. I remembered my name. Remember, Mom. I don't know why. But from then on, I started drawing, secretly hiding the drawings under the wooden carpet. Drawing houses, drawing fathers, drawing cats, drawing wooden cars. She found them. She tore them all up, threw them into the fireplace, but I hid one." He reached out and pointed to his pocket, where the police found a crumpled piece of paper, scribbled with 3 people holding hands. The next day, the police searched the treehouse a second time, this time more thoroughly. They found a diary under the bedboard, full of words written in tiny strokes, dense, each page like a confession from hell. Today, the boy smiled at me. I started hearing my son's voice in his voice. I know this is wrong, but I can't lose another child. I'm not kidnapping. I'm just correcting a mistake of creation. Each line of text like a knife cutting into Margaret's skin when she was shown a copy by the police. She couldn't read more than 3 pages. She pushed the book away, ran to the bathroom, and vomited until she was exhausted. That evening, Charlie didn't sleep again. Margaret sat next to him, not saying anything. After a while, he turned around, looking at his mother. "I think I'm someone else," his voice like begging for forgiveness. "I thought I never had a mom." Margaret burst into tears. She bowed her head, hugging her son without any words. The first hug that Charlie didn't flinch. The Bennett family's house, which had once been as warm as a winter embrace, was now silent like a cut that no one touched. Charlie had been brought back. His room had been cleaned. Everything left as it was the day he left. But the house was no longer a safe haven, not for Margaret. Every wall, every corner, reminded her of her own blindness. That night, after Charlie fell asleep in David's arms, the only one he could get close to at this time, Margaret entered the bedroom of the 2 spouses, closed the door, and began to break down. She screamed, not for anyone, not because she wanted to be heard, but because there was no other way to survive. Everything related to Rose, photos, gifts, handkerchiefs, the books they used to read together, were thrown to the floor by Margaret. She smashed the picture frames, tore each page of the book, knocked over the table where she used to place cups of tea and old stories. "She sat here," she screamed, punching hard on the edge of the table. "She looked me in the eyes and stole my son." No one answered, only her own panting. David opened the door, stepping inside. He looked at the chaotic scene, not saying anything, just stepping forward to hug his wife tightly. But Margaret struggled, her face wet with tears, her throat hoarse. "You know what? I brought the boy to the very person who hurt him. I put him in Rose's hands. I told him to call her Aunt. I smiled at her. I trusted. What kind of mother am I?" David was silent. His eyes were full of pity, but there was no answer enough to soothe that torment. "I should have seen it sooner," she said, her voice breaking like a cracked piece of glass. "No one thought of that, Margaret. No one," David whispered. "But I'm his mother. I had to see it," she screamed, then collapsed on the floor, curling up like a child. For the next 3 days, Margaret lived like a shadow. She avoided Charlie's gaze, although always watching him from afar. But the boy, even though he was back home, still hadn't really returned. Charlie didn't call Mom, not crying, not happy as people imagined. He quietly sat in the corner, sometimes drawing closed circles on paper. Every time Margaret approached, he slightly avoided, not looking straight. Although he didn't show fear, his eyes simply didn't remember who she was, and that killed her every hour. One afternoon, when David took Charlie to therapy, Margaret was left alone in the house. She stepped into her son's room, her feet slow as if treading on every unhealed wound. The familiar room now became strange, the wallpaper of planets, the superhero comic books that he used to laugh so hard at, now silent like the ruins of an old world. Margaret walked to the bookshelf, taking out a book, The Boy and the Whale, once Charlie's favorite story. She flipped to the page folded at the corner, where he had underlined the line, "The whale never forgets that the sea is its home." Margaret choked back tears. She took out a pen, her hand trembling, writing underneath, "Mom also never forgets that you are my son." After that, she gently placed the book under her son's pillow, like a silent whisper sent into the boy's sleep, hoping that one day he would read it himself. That night, Margaret stayed awake all night. She took a piece of paper and began to write. Not a report, not a letter to anyone else. It was a letter to Rose, but not to be sent. She knew Rose wouldn't read it. This letter was not for the recipient, but for the writer herself to utter what could not be said to anyone. Rose, perhaps when writing these lines, I am no longer the Margaret you once knew. I am no longer calm enough, gentle enough, generous enough to understand why you did that. I only know. I hurt. It hurts so much that sometimes I want to tear my heart out to stop hearing it say, "You trusted the wrong person. You once lost a child." I thought, no one who has ever experienced that could hurt another child. But I was wrong. You didn't love Charlie. You only loved your own pain. You didn't see him as a child. You only saw him as compensation for a loss. I don't hate you. Because if I hated you, maybe I could still get up and move on. But I'm scared. Scared of my own trust. Scared that in those months, I was smiling at you, while my son was being held captive in the forest, calling someone else Mom, and thinking I was dead. I don't know if there will ever come a day when Charlie will look at me without strangeness. I don't know if in his dreams, he will still see you instead of me. I only know I handed my son over to the devil with my own hands, and will have to live with that for the rest of my life. Margaret folded the letter, carefully as if it were a fragile child, then tucked it into the desk drawer, where she used to keep the fairy tales Charlie loved most. The therapy room was on the third floor of the medical center, not large, not elaborate, but bright and quiet enough. By the window was a white orchid pot, blooming silently like a patient friend. Charlie sat in a corner of the room, holding a colored pencil. He drew a circle, then another line cutting across. Like that, no clear shape, no bright colors, just overlapping gray streaks like memories that cannot be formed. Opposite him was Jenna, a young psychotherapist, her eyes gentle as morning dew. "You can call this the safe room," she said, not forcing him to look. "You don't have to talk if you're not ready. Just sitting here is enough." Charlie didn't answer, but didn't leave, just sat there, his hand gripping the pencil so tightly it was white. For many of the early days, Jenna didn't ask much. She played instrumental music, gave him sand art, clay, drawing books, blank canvases, one item each day, as if sowing seeds into a wasteland. The first time Charlie reacted was when he heard the wind whistling through the crack in the door. He jumped up, retreated to the corner of the wall, his face drained of blood. Jenna just stood up, gently closing the window, not asking, just putting a blanket on his shoulders. "You're okay. Here, no one will lock you up. No one will force you to listen to anything if you don't want to." Charlie nodded slightly, an almost unconscious movement, but the first time he reacted meaningfully. Margaret often came to pick up her son after each therapy session. At first, she just stood outside, looking through the glass. Charlie didn't look back. She understood. He wasn't ready. But every day she came, as regularly as the light at the end of the day, without words, without demands. One day, Jenna suggested, "Have you ever told him about the day he was born?" Margaret smiled lightly, her eyes drooping. He doesn't remember who I am. I'm afraid I'll hurt him." "No," Jenna said. "What is real, even blurred, can still touch him in his heart. If you speak with love, he will recognize it." That evening, Margaret sat down beside Charlie as he was coloring on the floor. She didn't sit too close or hold his hand. "You know," she began, her voice like telling a fairy tale. "You were born on a cloudy day with light rain. The doctor said you were the loudest baby crying that day. The whole hospital heard it." Charlie didn't look up, but his hand paused. "You were red, wrinkled, and weak. But when I put you on my chest, you stopped immediately. I think you recognized my heartbeat, the sound you heard from inside my belly every day." She didn't expect him to say anything. She just needed him to listen. And from that day on, Charlie began to draw differently. The first picture was a tree, barren, leafless, but there was a swing swaying. The second picture was a tiny boy sitting on the grass next to a woman with an unclear face. Both were just black pencil strokes, but the boy's hand was drawn elongated, touching the woman's hand. The third picture was a shaky line. "Someone used to hug me." Jenna put her hand on her chest. Her heart twinged. And Margaret, when she saw the painting, just bowed her head, not saying a word. But that night, she put a hug between the two pillows on Charlie's bed, as if leaving him a sign of memory, if he was ready to receive it. One afternoon, Charlie stood in front of the mirror in the treatment room. He looked at himself. "Do you remember what your name is?" Jenna asked, very softly. Charlie pursed his lips. Then, like a miracle from the darkness that had just melted away, he whispered, "Charlie Bennett." His voice was hoarse, shaky, but clear, as if that name had just been chosen again after losing it. Jenna didn't cry, but she was stunned. She knew this was one of the most important moments in the life of a child who had had his identity bent. That evening, Margaret was peeling apples in the kitchen when Charlie walked in. He stood silently for a moment, then approached. His hand trembled, but he took his mother's hand himself, for the first time. Margaret didn't say anything. She just took her son's hand, tightly, as if the pain that had been tearing apart was finding a place to retreat. He didn't leave like he always did. He sat down in the chair, looking at the sliced apples. Did Mom used to peel apples like this?" His voice was very small, as if inquiring about an old world. Margaret choked back tears. She nodded, smiling. "Every time you were sick, Mom peeled apples for you to eat. I always cut them into sailboat shapes. You said it looked like it was floating on a sea of apples." Charlie frowned, as if a memory was trying to surface from the depths. There was one time I dropped a piece of apple on the floor and cried." Margaret held her breath. "Yeah, you cried so loud, as if the whole world was collapsing. Mom had to make 2 more sailboats to make up for it." Charlie smiled slightly. A smile as thin as a thread, but real. Margaret stood up, bringing another apple. This time, she cut it into the shape of a sailboat, placing it in front of her son. Charlie looked at it for a long time, then picked it up, not eating it right away, just pressing it lightly against his cheek as if measuring if the memory fit. Cell number 27, a block, Maple Ridge Correctional Facility, where offenders who are not particularly dangerous are held in a mildly controlled environment. Rose Whitmore was transferred here after a psychiatrist confirmed she was completely sane at the time of the crime. The room was small, painted gray, with a single iron bed and a wooden table nailed to the floor. A high window with steel bars was hazy, enough light to know that the day was still passing. In that room, Rose sat every day, not pleading, not resisting, just sitting and writing. Prison police said she had a notebook, always kept under her pillow. No one read it. She didn't share it either. The lines were written every night in a font leaning to the right, regularly, like a penance in ink. One October morning, a prison guard brought in a white envelope. "You have a letter," the guard said, his voice indifferent. "From Margaret Bennett." Rose didn't say anything, just reached out and took it. She didn't open it right away, put it on the table, looking at it, then folded it again, putting it in her pocket. It wasn't until evening, after roll call, that she opened it. The dim light from the dull fluorescent lamp shone down on the folded paper. The letter was handwritten, the handwriting familiar, soft but firm. "Rose, I'm writing not to accuse. The law has already done that. I'm writing because I need to ask. I lost my son for 5 months. Every night, I didn't know if my son was still alive or dead, and you, the person I trusted most, was the one who knew the answer, but was silent. I'm not asking you why. I just want to know. Was there a moment you thought of me as a mother? Did you ever think I also lost a child?" Rose read, not blinking, her face not changing color. She didn't cry. No tears fell. But her shoulders shook slightly, not following any specific rhythm, as if preventing a convulsion from deep inside her chest. She folded the letter carefully, like folding an ancient scripture, then brought it to her forehead, touching it lightly, like a final ritual. After that, she quietly tucked it under her pillow, where she used to hide the whispers in her diary. The next morning, Rose woke up early. She didn't talk to her cellmate, didn't ask for extra time outside. She took out the notebook, writing another page, the last page that people saw her writing. A prison officer recounted. She wrote very slowly, as if weighing each word in blood. After that, she closed the book, put it in my hand, and just said, "Keep it for me." She didn't write anymore from that day on. No conversation, no asking about news from outside. When invited to a parole hearing, she only replied, "I don't need to appeal." The court noted Rose Whitmore pleaded guilty to all charges, from kidnapping, illegal detention, to violation of the person of a minor. No pleading for leniency, no explanation. The police chief, who had investigated Charlie's disappearance, said in a press conference, "She didn't run away, but she also didn't regret it in the way people expected. She accepted the punishment, without complaining and without hoping." In prison, Rose lived silently like a shadow. The guards called her the ghost of the day. She ate, slept, walked like an old clock that didn't need adjusting, just turning out of inertia. Margaret's letter was still kept under her pillow, taken out and looked at once a day. Not reading it again, just looking. As if she still hoped after many times of looking, the question would disappear from the paper. But it didn't disappear. Did you ever think, I also lost a child? That question hung suspended like a door that no one passed through. Could not be closed, could not be opened. Rose couldn't answer, not because she didn't have an answer, but because every answer was a crime. A month later, Rose was allowed to go to the yard for an hour each morning. She didn't walk, didn't look at the sky, just sat on a stone bench in the corner of the yard, where there was a potted plant planted by another prisoner. Every day she stared at it, a small rosemary bush, barren but still trying to grow weak green sprouts. The police had seen her gently stroke the trunk of the tree, as if touching something that had disappeared a very long time ago. A prison guard recounted, she once whispered, "Charlie likes the smell of mint more, but rosemary doesn't lie." No one understood the sentence, but no one asked further. There were nights when cellmates woke up because of a very soft scratching, the sound of a pencil rubbing on paper. But the next morning, when looking at Rose's notebook, the page was still blank. Another night, Rose posted the calendar on the wall. She personally circled the day her son, the child who had been lost, was born. Under the red circle, she wrote a faint line. "If one day Charlie forgives, let my boy know I didn't kill another child." No one clearly understood what that meant, and no one dared to tear that calendar off the wall. It rained lightly on a winter evening, the wind whistling softly on the porch like a sigh from the last leaves of the season. In the small room where memories once filled, the soft yellow light shone down on the blanket covering two figures lying close together. Charlie slept in his old room again, for the first time after long days. The room had been cleaned, but everything was kept the same. The low bookcase, the drawing of the treasure map hanging above the bed, the pillow that had lost a thread on the edge and on the corner of the table, the wooden car that had returned, placed in the right place. Margaret sat on the bed, her back against the wall, gently stroking her son's hair. She didn't say anything, just put her breathing close to Charlie's breathing, so the boy knew she was still there. No more crying, no more tears, only silence, but a kind of silence that has shape, has warmth, like a small fire burning in the long night. Charlie was lying on his back, his head close to his mother. He didn't close his eyes. His pupils were wide open, reflecting the ceiling lights, full of panic like a bird that had just escaped from its cage. Margaret didn't force him to close his eyes. No telling stories, no coaxing. She just gently put her hand on her son's back, a touch that wasn't intrusive, just to let Charlie know, "If you need it, Mom is here." Time seemed to stop. The clock ticked softly. Then, very softly, Charlie spoke. His voice seemed to break out of a very deep corner. Not words, but a wound that had just healed enough to dare to leak emotions. "Mom is real, right?" Margaret stopped. Her heart felt like it was being strangled. But she didn't cry. She bowed her head, pressing her cheek to her son's forehead, whispering, "Yes, son. Mom has always been real. Mom has never left you." Charlie still didn't answer, but Margaret could feel that small body shaking slightly, as if fighting a layer of fog still lingering in his heart. A moment later, he pulled his hand back, crawling further under the covers. Margaret didn't stop him, just pulled the blanket up higher, softly whispering, "Sleep now, son. Mom is here." A few minutes later, Charlie suddenly asked, Did Mom sing lullabies before?" Margaret paused. She didn't think he would remember that. Her heart clenched, but she nodded. "Yes. You liked the song Firefly. I used to sing it every night when you were 3 years old." Charlie turned around, his eyes wide open in the dim light. "Do you still remember the words?" Margaret stroked her son's hair, then started to sing softly, her voice hoarse but steady. The melody was slow, gentle, like the flickering light from a real firefly flying through childhood. Charlie closed his eyes, not saying anything more. But towards the end, he faintly hummed the last few words of the song, his voice breaking, as if he had just found something that had been lost for a very long time. The room at this moment seemed to freeze between two worlds, a world that had been lost and a world that was just beginning again. There were no miracles, no background music rising, just a small arm finding its way back from being lost. Margaret whispered, "You don't have to believe it right away. Mom can wait, as long as it takes." Charlie didn't answer, but he hugged her tighter. For the first time since being found, he actively touched his mother, not out of fear, but because he needed to feel real. That night, he fell asleep in Margaret's arms. His eyes closed slowly, his breath gradually deep and even. The dreams, if any, no longer had wooden rooms or repeated stories, just the smell of his mother's hair and the steady heartbeat that he had heard since he was a fetus. Outside the window, the rain had stopped. Moonlight shone through the frosted glass, leaving a layer of dim light on the windowsill. The wooden car was put back in place, the front of the car facing in, like a whisper, "I'm home." David stood leaning against the doorframe, watching his wife and son hug through the gap. He didn't step inside, just squeezed his hand lightly, then quietly turned away, leaving them with their own small world. The next morning, when getting ready to go back to school for the first time after the trauma, Charlie sat blankly next to the dining table, tapping lightly on the chair. David stepped up to tie his son's backpack, while Margaret stood leaning against the doorframe, her hand squeezing lightly. Charlie looked at his mother, then spoke, his voice small but clear. Can I take the wooden car with me?" Margaret almost burst into tears. She nodded, reaching out her hand. Charlie didn't hand her the car. He put it in his mother's hand, then turned to get his coat. That afternoon, Charlie drew. The picture was a small house with light in the window. A woman sat inside, next to a child. Both were unclear, but their hands were connected by a red thread. On the roof was a crooked line. "Here I am, called by my real name." Margaret hugged the painting to her chest, not saying anything.